What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Putin's so-called special military operation in Ukraine has been marked by brutality, devastation, and the chilling indifference of those in power. But today, let's talk about even more unbelievably horrible things that Putin is ready to do in order to continue his unjustified invasion of Ukraine. We're especially going to focus on Putin's new obsession of brainwashing the youngest population of Russians while fully depopulating some regions of healthy men of working age. Just when it feels that Putin simply can't go further in his atrocities, he always finds a way. I only wish he will be so devoted, motivated and passionate about ending this war or at least finding a peaceful resolution, but so far, his political power and reach only extends to unimaginable things. Last week, Russia launched one of the deadliest attacks on the ongoing war in Ukraine. The strike on Poltava, a city in central Ukraine, resulted in the elimination of at least 58 civilians, and more than 200 others got injured. The use of ballistic missiles against the Institute of Communications in Poltava, a city which by the way is more than 250 kilometers or 150 miles away from the nearest front line, it highlights the indiscriminate nature of this violence, which has shattered the lives of ordinary people. This attack is not an isolated incident. It is not only one that happened. It is just the most recent one, and it is a part of a larger, persistent campaign that has left no city in Ukraine untouched. Frontline cities are mostly in ruins. The nearby settlements are partially destroyed, with some of its residents leaving the houses, maybe even forever. And in the example of Poltava, even some distant cities in central and western Ukraine were not able to escape the attacks and destruction by the Russian army. Why this particular attack against Poltava is so important? It is because it revealed even more horrible things about the mindset of Putin. Specifically, him brainwashing the youngest generation of kids and eliminating almost the entire male populations of some cities and regions. The reality of the situation is bleak. Vladimir Putin has unleashed almost all of Russia's military might on Ukraine, except, of course, nuclear weapons. In my previous video we talked about the possibility of him using the nukes as well. So if you missed it, please go ahead and watch it. It's very interesting and insightful. These continuous attacks are not based on strategic military targets, but rather appear pretty random. It feels like that the main goal is to scare and demoralize the Ukrainian population and their army, but in reality, each attack unites the people of Ukraine even further. Personally, I am yet to witness the reaction of a Ukrainian who will say, "Oh no, another attack by Russians, and I can't take it anymore. Ukraine should surrender to make it stop." Instead, the reactions are completely the opposite. Hospitals, schools, and residential buildings have all been hit. Putin is not restrained by morality, he's only restrained by his military resources. When supplies run low, the attacks momentarily pause, but as soon as stocks are replenished, missiles rain down once again. Each new wave of destruction brings further tragedy and diminishes the prospect of peace. The more devastating Russia's attacks become, the more intense Ukrainians respond, spiraling the conflict out of control even further. However, the consequences are not just felt in Ukraine. Every strike is pushing Russia further down a path of isolation and self-destruction. The more Putin escalates, the more he erodes Russia's standing on the global stage and the stability of his own regime. Yet, despite the growing toll on his country, Putin seems uninterested and even detached from the harsh realities of this war. When attack on Poltava happened, Vladimir Putin was very far from the place. He was in Tuva, a remote region of Russia, addressing school children and boasting about Russia's supposed military success. Such events are called разговоры о главном, which literally translates to the conversations about the important. This is a new practice done in Russian schools, where teachers are forced to talk about the invasion of Ukraine, justify it, talk about how important it is for Russia to defeat all of its external enemies, to preserve its sovereignty, and why Russia has to defend itself against anyone, and if there is time left, A little bit talking about the traditional family values. This became some sort of a mandatory class that teachers have no right to ignore. Because Russian teachers are public workers, they are paid from the government budget. Most of them live from paycheck to paycheck and are in the middle of their lives and worked in education most, if not all, of their professional careers. Because of this, many teachers unfortunately have no other choice but to hold these patriotic classes. They don't have savings. If they stop getting paid, they will run out of money in a couple of months, at most. If they quit, the government won't take care of them. Quitting at your own will not qualify you for unemployment benefits. And for this reason, some teachers, they prefer to talk about the important, but in a less militaristic way. Or some even talk against Putin and his invasion, but unfortunately, because of a circle of accountability, such teachers are often found and punished. Because if the Russian government comes to know about such things happening and the colleagues do not report this person, everyone will be punished. Just like the KGB and the USSR, you might ask, right? Well, precisely. Later on, when such teachers are fired, they are shamed in front of the entire country by making their cases public across Russian state media, so that the future troublemakers will think twice. But that's classic propaganda 101. Out of hundreds or even thousands anti-Putin government workers that were fired, only one will make it to the news. And sometimes Putin himself can make an announced visit to some schools and hold his own talks about the important. With the kids, obviously. And this is exactly what happened during the attack against Poltava. And by the way, a very interesting tendency can be seen. The more devastating the Russian attacks against civilian targets, the further Putin is from Kremlin. Pay attention to this next time, you will see exactly what I mean. So, this time, Putin's speech was far removed from the horrific consequences of the ongoing war. Despite the undeniable tragedies that the conflict has brought on both Ukrainians and Russians, Putin appeared unconcerned, even happy. His detachment from reality is troubling. To him, the war in Ukraine seems to be a distant, abstract affair, something that does not affect his daily life, even though it was him and nobody else who started this horror. The Russian president's casual attitude in the face of such devastation is a reflection of his growing isolation. Surrounded by advisors and military leaders who continue to paint a picture of victory, Putin appears convinced that everything is going according to his plan. And this problem is also of his own making. He created the regime of fear, where bad news, even if, or especially if, they are true, are met with strong denial. And the bearer of such bad news are usually fired or demoted. This is why Putin's inner circle and everyone who works under them prefer to lie, give their superiors only good news, no matter how small they are, or in the worst case scenario, sweeten the truth. Of course, this will create a picture of total success inside Putin's head. Which brings us to another discovery. Putin most likely bases his decisions on such lies, thinking that everything is well and goes according to the master plan. But sooner or later, as we all know, the lies fall apart. And Putin will face a completely new reality where he would not know how to behave, how to respond, or who especially to blame. This will be precisely the moment for Ukraine, the international community, and the Russian opposition to push even harder and to end the regime of Putin once and for all. But for now, Putin follows his time-proven tactic, which is propaganda and brainwashing of the population. He knows that the threat of external enemy unites people no matter what. He thinks that he will continue his war for decades. This is why it is about time for him to start working on the youngest generation of Russians. And this is exactly why Putin right now started focusing on literally elementary school kids. They will be raised in this reality, where Ukraine and the West are the enemies, and they will not need the same huge financial incentives the Russian men receive right now in order to go fight in Putin's war. Putin does not care about the future of Russia. He tries to raise the generation of soldiers. And the most troubling thing is that it is the very same Putin who sent these kids' fathers to die in Ukraine. And the amount and strength of propaganda it takes to convince the very same kids to lay down their own lives as well, instead of revolting against the regime which ruined their families. I mean, the strength of propaganda is just absolutely out of this world, but Putin somehow found a way. Putin's decision to visit Tuva, a remote region in Siberia, to hold these conversations about the important might seem insignificant at first glance. However, the choice of location for his speech is deeply symbolic. Tuva is one of the poorest regions in Russia, with a population that has suffered the most significant consequences of this war. According to himself, Putin himself, around 10,000 men from Tuva currently fight in Ukraine, an astonishing number for a region with a population of just 330,000, half of which are men, and half of these half are men of working age. So according to the roughest estimations, more than 12% of Tuva working age men are now fighting in Ukraine, which is every 9th person. And this is considering we believe the number given to us by Putin, which in reality might be even higher. Tuva has become what many refer to as the cannon fodder for the Russian military. The region's poverty, high crime rates, and lack of opportunities have made it an ideal recruitment ground for the Russian army. Thousands of men from Tuva region have signed up to fight in Ukraine, many driven by the promise of a $22,000 contract money that could drastically improve their families' lives. However, for many of these men, the contract is unfortunately a death sentence. For the people of Tuva, unlike Putin, or even the residents of major cities like Moscow or St. Petersburg, the war is not an abstract conflict taking place in a distant land. Even though, ironically, Moscow and St. Petersburg are much closer to Ukraine than Tuva itself. It is a daily reality that has touched at this point every family. Yet, when Putin addressed the school children in Tuva, there was no mention of the sacrifices their community has made. Instead, he smiled and joked, oblivious to the fact that many of the children he was speaking to had likely lost a father, brother, or an uncle in this war. Tuva is just one of the regions of Russia which sent an enormous percentage of its men to war in Ukraine. There is also Buryatia and many more, where the situation is equally dire. The visit to Tuva, far from being a show of solidarity, was yet another reminder of how disconnected Putin is from the human cost of his own actions. To Putin, the war in Ukraine is a game of geopolitical chess, where every town captured is a victory and every missile strike is a show of strength. The suffering of civilians, both in Ukraine and in Russia, does not enter into his calculations. This detachment from reality is dangerous not only for Ukraine, but also for Russia itself. Putin's focus on capturing towns in Donbass while leaving Russia's own borders exposed is indicative of a leader who is more concerned with appearances rather than the actual situation. The continuous bombardment of Russian cities, the growing economic crisis, and the increasing disagreement among ordinary Russians are all being ignored. As long as the war does not reach Moscow, it is somebody else's problem. But how long can this fantasy last? Well, there you have it, guys. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel for more videos like this if you wish to support my work. There are PayPal donations, Patreon subscriptions for bonus content. You can also buy the Russian Dude merch. All the links are down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell, their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they